All right, so today we're going to be talking about tactics. That's this book here. If you want to look at it afterwards, I can show it to you, but I'm going to need it for my teaching. So, um, before we get into it, I sent a video to a group. Not all of you are in the group because not all of you are on Facebook, but basically this video, I wanted to share a really short video. This guy found himself in a predicament where he was debating or arguing for the existence of God. And he said that he had the other person says, well, you know, uh, if God exists, how can you send people to hell or something like that? And the guy debated him and he said, it was an easy argument to win. But then after that, he said, I messed up really bad. What he said is that even though I won the argument, what I found out later is that the reason why the guy was asking this is because his wife had committed suicide. And so he was asking, can a person that commits to suicide go to heaven? And so instead of answering the person, he answered the question. And so it's really important that we answer the person, not just the question. Okay. And this is part of what tactics is all about. Understanding the question, understanding why they're asking it is just as important, if not more important. Okay. All right. So what is tactics? Tactics, on the cover of the book, it says it's a game plan to help you discuss your Christian convictions. It's a game plan, and the way he puts it is this. It's a way to not manipulate, but manage a conversation about Jesus, about God, about the Bible, right? Not manipulate it, but manage it. And so we're gonna dive right into the first example that he gives. This is not in your notes, but I'm gonna run you through it, and it'll be up here. This is a conversation he had with a waitress in Wisconsin. One time he was at this restaurant, and he said he noticed this waitress wearing some jewelry that looked like a star or something. And so here's the conversation he had with her. This is the Witch in Wisconsin story he tells in the book. All right. So GK, that'll be Greg Koukl. That'll be him talking. Okay. So Greg Koukl says, does that necklace have religious significance or is it just jewelry? So you notice the necklace and he starts a conversation. Okay. And she says, yes, it has religious significance. The 5 points stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit. I'm a pagan. Now, it's funny, but it's not. So at this moment, so Greg's wife was with him. And he said his wife started laughing because she's never heard anyone say that before. She's never heard anyone say, I'm a pagan. And so but she quickly stopped herself, right? But it's a good example of be very careful because you might hear some weird things in conversations, okay? So she says, I'm sorry, I've just never heard anybody call themselves a pagan before. She said, okay, that's fine. So then Greg says, okay, oh, so you're Wiccan. Notice how he's asking questions. And she says, yes, it's an earth religion like the Native Americans. We respect all life, she says. Now, the way this conversation is going to go is not necessarily a conversation leading someone to Christ. This is actually about abortion, but it's a good example. We're still going to use it. She says, yes, it's like the Native Americans. We respect all life. So what does Greg do? He says, if you respect all life, then I suppose you must be pro-life on the abortion issue. Notice another question. She responds, no, actually, I'm not. I'm pro-choice. What Greg is doing here is he's gathering information, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay? He's gathering information. Greg says, that's a bit surprising. Isn't that an unusual position for someone in Wicca to take? I mean, since you are committed to respecting all life. Another question. And she admits, you're right, it is odd. She says, I know I could never do that. I could never kill a baby. As soon as she says, I could never kill a baby, Greg does something. From now on, he's not going to use the word abortion. He's going to use the term that she used, kill a baby. Okay. So now Greg chooses to switch terms. Instead of abortion, he's going to use baby killing as the word. Greg says, well, maybe you wouldn't hurt a baby, but other people would. Shouldn't we do something to stop other people from killing babies? He's making her think. Okay. She comes back, she says, well, I think women should have a choice. He said this in the book. He said she responded extremely quickly without thinking. And what he noticed is that this is a very common slogan. So what he suspects is that she's just repeating a slogan that she's used to hearing, right? Then Greg says, again, another question. Do you mean women should have the choice to kill their own babies? She responds, well, I think all things should be taken into consideration on this question. I love this conversation. Again, he asks another question. Okay, tell me, what kind of considerations would it make it okay to kill a baby? And so again, she repeats a common slogan, incest. He said she's simply repeating slogans. She could have used rape. That's another common one. Again, another question. I don't know if you can read that, but I'll read it for you. Let me see if I understand your view. So that's very important. He's trying to make sure he understands her view. That's extremely important. Okay. Let me see if I understand your view. Let's just say I have a 2-year-old child standing next to me who had been conceived as a result of incest. On your view, it seems I should have the liberty to kill that baby or kill her. Is that right? I'd have mixed feelings about that. And the last thing he said was, I hope so. But he said at this point, he's in a line. I think he was trying to pay for his meal. And this conversation probably happened pretty quick. And he said there was a line building up behind him. So he said, okay, well, he just cordially left. He said, thank you for the conversation and so forth. So on. He let it be, right? He didn't sit there and try to argue with her, right? So now what can we learn from this conversation? Well, what he says in the book is this: with tactics, if you can learn tactics, he calls it, you will be able to stay in the driver's seat the whole time, meaning you will be able to drive the conversation where you want it. He is in control of the conversation the whole time. And he also knew when to stop. That's wisdom. He knew when to stop. He knew not to just keep going. But you know what? Here's the thing. He wasn't trying to necessarily convince her that abortion is wrong. He was trying to plant a seed. He was trying to put a little bit of doubt in her mind. Okay. Let's face it. If you're sitting there trying to argue with somebody, they're going to eventually get upset the more you push, and then they'll just stop listening. So I think it was a very wise way he handled that. Now, here's the thing with tactics. We're not trying to create this gotcha moment, just to embarrass the person, but to make them think, to plant that seed of doubt, like I said. Why? Well, because, I think we all agree that way of thinking is dangerous. So it's important. All right. Next, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about being an ambassador for Christ. What is an ambassador? Anybody know what an ambassador is? Like in the real world? Representative? Very good. All right. So it says, yes, ambassador is an accredited diplomat sent by a country as its official representative to a foreign country. Now, an ambassador for Christ, which the Bible talks about, is a person that represents Christ well. Correct? But in the book, he talks about a good ambassador for Christ needs to have 3 things. Good ambassador for Christ needs to have knowledge, wisdom, and good character. Why? Well, let's just talk about what these are. So knowledge, what kind of knowledge should you have? Well, if you're a Christian, you should probably know Scripture fairly well. You should probably be able to talk about Scripture. Apologetics, or reasons to believe, right? Reasons to believe, that's probably good. You should probably know a little bit about the person you're talking to. Like, there are things that you should know. We'll talk about what it looks like if you don't have that. Next thing is wisdom. Wisdom is how we apply our knowledge. Notice in that conversation, not only did he have knowledge, he knew when to come in, come out. He knew what to ask to plant that seed effectively. So this is how we apply our knowledge. What should I say? When should I say it? How should I say it? What will be effective and not a stumbling block for this person? That's wisdom. And then character. Am I known to be somewhat of a moral person? Do I love well? Am I empathetic? Do people feel like they can trust me? Am I easily angered? All kinds of things. Let's face it, you can have all the knowledge and wisdom in the world and poor character, people won't trust you, right? Okay. So what happens when you're missing one of these things? Well, again, like I said, if you're missing good character, they're not going to trust what you say, even if it's correct. If you're missing wisdom, you're going to say something at the wrong time or in the wrong way. And if you're missing knowledge, you're not going to know what to say. So you need all three to be a good ambassador for Christ. Any questions? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let's move on. So the scripture that he uses in tactics is this. I'll read the whole thing. You have it in your notes. I think it's at the bottom of towards the bottom of the first page. Colossians 4:5-6. I think I have it a little bit longer in there, but it's devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word. That God will open up to us a door for the word. So an opportunity, right? So that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I have also been imprisoned. This is Paul, that I may make it clear in the way that I ought to proclaim it. And then finally, verse 5-6 is conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders or unbelievers, correct? Making the most of the opportunity. Your speech must always be with grace. That reminds me of character and wisdom, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. Notice how it says respond to each person. It's not a cookie cutter method. Every person needs something a little different. And this is kind of funny. He says in the book, these tactics are pretty powerful and you can actually use them for bad. Because if you know how to manage conversation, you could do that if you wanted to. But we're not doing that, obviously. We want to use it for good. So the next thing I want to touch on, and we've talked about this a little bit, what happens when someone gets angry? Remember I said he knew when to stop? He knew when to stop pushing? If he keeps pushing and pushing and pushing and doesn't have the wisdom and the restraint to stop, she'll probably get upset. He might get upset. But the point is that if anybody gets upset or anybody gets angry, you lose. You probably just lost that conversation. You probably just lost the impact that you could have had in that person's life. So avoid getting upset and angry. Don't even look angry if you are on the inside. And it's not always possible, but avoid making them upset if it's possible to avoid that. And if it starts going that direction, you might want to either change topics or just end the conversation. Because you don't want to leave a bad taste in someone's mouth, especially if you plan on witnessing to them later. Let's talk about arguments. Are arguments bad? They can be. Anybody ever been in a heated argument? That's usually what we think of, right? Arguing, argumentative. But arguments in and of themselves, without the emotion, without the heatedness of it, what is it? Well, an argument, simply put, is a reason or set of reasons given with the aim of persuading others that an action or idea is right or wrong. Now, if you just look at that definition, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's probably a good thing we do that from time to time. How you write a paper, very good. How do how are you supposed to combat anything evil or anything that's wrong-headed if you don't make an argument against it? So an argument by itself is not a bad thing. It's how you argue. Then the next question is, well, do arguments work? Do arguments work? Well, they sure can. We'll look at I'm going to read Acts 17. Little brief part of it here. Yeah, it's in your notes. So this is Paul, or this is about Paul, I should say. Now, when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's custom, he visited them, and for 3 Sabbaths, he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I am proclaiming to you is the Christ. He's making a case, he's making an argument. And it said, and some of them, not all of them, some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas. Okay, so if a person is open and honest and willing to listen, it can work. Okay. Now here's the question that always comes up. Can you argue someone into the kingdom of God? Well, let me ask you this question. Can you love somebody into the kingdom of God? I don't know. It depends. It depends. We talked about, is their heart soft? Is the soil ready for a seed to be planted? I can love somebody really, really well for many, many years, and they might not ever come to Christ, right? Or same thing, I could give somebody in good arguments every day for the rest of my life, and they may never come to Christ. So is it really just about the arguments or the love? Not just about those things. Greg Koukl says this, and I think it's spot on. Without God's work, nothing else works. But with God's work, many things work. Without God's work, nothing works, but with God's work, many things can work. So unless basically the Holy Spirit is working upon their heart, nothing's going to work. If that's not happening, it's not going to work. If their heart is shut off to the Spirit, it's not going to work. But if their heart's open to the Spirit and Spirit's working, you'll have to use discernment on what that person needs. Maybe they just need you to spend time with them and love them. Or maybe they need some questions answered. That's something you'll have to discern. The point of it is that many things can lead people to Christ if God's at work. Now, for tactics, we're setting a very modest goal, okay? We are not setting the goal of, I got to lead this person to Christ right now in this conversation. That's not our goal. If that happens, great, awesome, but that's not our goal. Our goal is this: put a stone in their shoe. It's like usually like really tiny, but it feels like that. And then you try to look for it, and you can't even find it in your shoe, right? Our goal is to put a stone in someone's shoe, meaning I'm going to say something or do something to make them think. And so when they walk away, they go, ooh, I can't stop thinking about it. It kind of made sense what he said. There's a stone in their shoe, right? So what can I say or do to make them think? He puts it this way: how can I annoy them in a good way? Right? How can I annoy them in a good way? Can I suggest an alternative to their worldview they may not? Sorry. Can I suggest an alternative to their worldview they might not have considered before? Okay. And he said, there are harvesters and gardeners. He says he focuses on gardening himself. We've talked about gardening before. Well, we'll read John chapter 4 here, some verses. I'll read it for you. Behold, I tell you, raise your eyes and observe the fields. They are white for harvest. Now, he's talking about people. People are ready for harvesting. He says, already the one who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, meaning the person leading people to Christ is gathering fruit for eternal life, their souls. But then he says this, it's very interesting, so that the one who sows and the one who reaps may rejoice together. So for in this case, the saying is true: one sows, another reaps. Okay, so I might be a sower or a gardener, and someone else in the future might be a harvester, or the one that reaps the soul. And it says this: Jesus said this. I sent you to reap, or to save souls, harvest, right? For that which you have not labored. In other words, you haven't done any of the hard work. I sent you to reap. And he says, but others have labored, and you have come into their labor. He's saying that these people that are ready for the harvest, their souls are ready to be saved. There's been all this work that you had no part of, that you have not labored for that. But then it says, but you're going to be the one that harvested. But it also says that the one who sows and the one who reaps rejoice together in that. So it's not just about, hey, come to Christ. Hey, let's say this prayer. It's about all the people, all the situations in a person's life that has led them to a moment where they might be ready to receive Christ. I'm sure a lot of us can attest to something like that in our lives. Yes, Kelly? Yeah, you might not. You probably won't, actually. Odds are you won't. Odds are you will not. In fact, the people that they led into to Christ, he's talking about people that have labored that probably weren't even around anymore. Okay? But we don't do it for that. We do it because we're called to do it, and then we trust that in the future there will be a harvest. Right? Does that make sense? So we probably will never see. I mean, I'm not saying we will never see it. There will be times when we see it. But if you're doing it on a constant basis and you're planting seeds in people's lives, there's going to be many of them that maybe come to Christ and you'll never know about it. But that's okay. We don't need to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about. You might not ever be the one to harvest that.
But what if that's heartbreaking to know that?
Why would it be heartbreaking? So basically, okay, so here's the difference in what you're saying and what he's saying here. You're saying, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but here's what you're saying, I think, is that, man, I put a lot of time and effort. I want to rejoice by seeing them come to Christ. That's exciting. I want to be there. I get it. But what he says here is that the one who sows and the one who reaps can rejoice together. And that could be in eternity. In eternity, we'll be able to see the ones that came to Christ and the things that we sowed into their lives, right? We might not see it here on earth, but eventually we'll see it. Do you see? But we don't need to see it here. As long as it happens, right? There are going to be people, if you're doing it on some level, there will be people that come to Christ and you may not ever even hear about it until eternity comes. Does that make sense? You hope you do. But the more important thing is that it gets harvested, whether we see it or not, right? I think you'd agree with that, that's the most important thing. Even though I want to see it, I just care that it happens, right? Well, if you plant, you might not be the one to harvest. If you're a harvester, you might not have been the one to plant, right? It goes both ways. God sees it, and I believe we'll eventually see it. Yeah, right, exactly. All right, let's get into what he calls the Columbo tactic. Did anybody ever watch this show, Columbo? So I'm not going to do a whole skit. He does a whole skit where he puts his trench coat on, he gets a cigar, and he talks like Columbo. I'm not going to do that. But that's where he gets it from. And the reason why is because Columbo asks a lot of questions, right? And in the book, Greg says asking questions is a habit you want to get into. If you've ever, or at least in the last few years, if you ever sit down with me for a meal, you'll notice I ask a lot of questions because I try to get into this habit myself. So what is this? What is the Columbo tactic? The Columbo tactic is the tactic of asking questions in order to guide a conversation to the destination you desire. It's not always going to work, but this is what it's supposed to be. And here's the thing. Your goal is to stay in the driver's seat of the conversation, meaning your goal is to try to not manipulate the conversation, but manage it, right? Your goal is to manage the conversation well. That's the goal, okay? How does this help? How does it help to ask questions and manage the conversation? Well, asking questions, one thing it means is you don't come across as preachy. You don't come across as Bible thumping. Okay. Another thing it does, and this is huge, it takes the pressure off of you, right? You don't have to sit there and try to debate or explain. You're just curious. You're trying to learn. Okay. So it takes the pressure out of you especially when you don't know what to say. It protects you from jumping to conclusions and misunderstanding them. And also, it buys you time to think about what you might say. Okay? Whenever you're in doubt, ask a question. Some more advantages. Sincere questions, and this is the key, sincere questions are friendly and flattering. You are displaying interest. Another thing, you'll get it. This is all in your notes. You'll get an education. Now, there is this example he gives in the book about somebody who's trying to witness to a Buddhist. And this person comes up to Greg and says, "Do you have any good books on Buddhism?" And he says, "Why do you need a book on Buddhism?" And he says, "Well, I'm trying to witness to this Buddhist and I don't know anything about it. I don't know what they believe." He says, "You don't know what they believe? Ask them. You don't need a book on Buddhism. In fact, if you read the book on Buddhism, you might be an expert in Buddhism, but that might not match exactly what they believe. So just ask questions to learn. You'll get an education." Another advantage is this allows you to make progress to a point without being pushy. So when you ask a question, you're not stating your view necessarily, so you have nothing to defend at that moment. Another thing is carefully placed questions allow you to control the conversation in a non-threatening way. And this can bring the intensity down. So let's say you're in a conversation and you got a lot to say, right? You want to say what's on your mind. Well, a lot of times, especially if it's a controversial topic, the tension can rise, right? But if I just say, "Oh, really? Can you tell me? Yeah, why do you believe that? Yeah, I'm interested. Yeah, what is that again? Can you explain that to me?" That's non-threatening. Okay, so it can bring the intensity way down, and you might ask yourself, "Oh, did Jesus do this?" He did, and I'll give you some examples. It's in your notes. A few verses here. First one is Mark chapter 2, 6-9. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "What does this man, or why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them, now, so Jesus said to them, "Why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, take up your bed and walk'?" This is actually what Jesus is doing here, would be what Greg would call Columbo Tactic 3, which is making a point by using a question. He's making a point by using a question. Okay. Another one is Luke 20. It says, "One day as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes with the elders came up and said to him, 'Tell us, by what authority do you do these things, or who is it that gave you this authority?' And Jesus answered them, 'I will also ask you a question. Now tell me, was the baptism of John from heaven or from man?' They discussed it, and they said, 'Well, if we say from heaven, he will say, why didn't you believe John? But if we say from man, then all these people around here are going to stone us because they're convinced John was a prophet.' So then they answered Jesus, 'I don't know where it came from,' or they don't know where it came from. Jesus said, 'Then neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things.' So he asked another question. Last example is Luke 20, verse 21. They asked him, 'Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly, and you show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not?' But again, Jesus perceived their craftiness and said to them, 'Show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have?' They said, 'Caesar's.' He said, 'Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, God the things that are God.' Now, he did this a lot. I think you guys know this already, but Jesus asked a lot of questions, and I think for some of the similar reasons. One, to make points, to draw things out of them, to show the sincereness of their heart, a lot of different things, but he asked a lot of questions. So it's very biblical. So next one is, okay, so what the Columbo tactic, what are the steps? There's 3 steps. 3 steps to the Columbo tactic. One, I don't know if you can see it, but it's one. The first step we're going to talk about is gather information with questions. The second step, we've talked about this a little bit, is to reverse the burden of proof with questions. And then we're not going to get to the third one today. We'll do that if several weeks when we get to the second class on tactics. But you make a point with a question. And basically, what these are is the first step is understanding what their view is. You're gathering information. What do you believe, and why do you? What do you believe? Basically, the second question is kind of like, why do you believe it? Can you show me the reasons you have for believing that? And then finally, when you want to make a point, you don't have to use a question, but again, it can be effective. So those are the 3 steps of the Columbo tactic. So when someone makes a claim that's against God or makes a claim against Christianity, what do you do? I'm going to read a few scenarios from the book here real quick. So he gives these scenarios, and we're gonna figure out how to answer them in a little bit here. All right. All right. Scene 1. Imagine this: you're at a dinner party. It's not in your notes. Sorry. You're at a dinner party with some of your close friends from church. The conversation ranges naturally over a number of interesting spiritual topics. Suddenly, to your surprise and embarrassment, the host's 15-year-old son announces with some belligerence that he doesn't believe in God anymore. He says, "It's simply not rational. There is no proof." What will you say? Next scene. It's the night of your weekly Bible study group. During the discussion of the Sunday sermon on the Great Commission, a newcomer comes by and remarks, "Who are we to say Christianity is better than any other religion? I think the essence of Jesus' teaching is love, the same as all religions. It's not our job to tell other people how to live or believe." How do you respond? Last scene he gives here is, so you're riding the university shuttle with a friend and who notices a Bible in your backpack. So you got a Bible in your backpack. And your friend says, "I've read the Bible before. Yeah, it's got some interesting stories, but people take it too seriously. I mean, it was only written by men. After all, men make mistakes." What do you say? We're gonna get to that in a little bit here. Um, so you have this situation and a claim is just made, right? Uh, now what? Now what do we do? Well, he says, according, this is roughly, but there's about a 10-second window where you got time to respond. Um, he says you got to speak up quickly because the opportunity might not last long. And he said, here's the thing. He says, I understand you might feel conflicted. You might want to say something like, or might want to say something, but you're also concerned about being sensitive, obviously, right? You're concerned about keeping the peace. You don't want to stir the pot. You want to preserve friendships. You don't want to look extreme, all those things. But in that moment, when a person says something, they make a claim, this is where the whole uh, tactics game begins, he says. So when that's made, you go to step 1. Somebody made a claim. In step 1, your initial response to that claim shouldn't be to preach and teach, but it should be to understand their views. That should be the very first step. Okay. If you're going to take away anything from this, just try to wrap your heads around this. Someone makes a claim, within 10 seconds, your goal shouldn't be, okay, I'm going to teach them everything I know. No, it should be to learn and understand their views first thing. Okay. Your main goal is to understand what the person is claiming, and you're trying to see it from their perspective. If I'm trying to have a fruitful conversation with somebody like that, I got to be on the same page with them. I have to know what they're talking about. Otherwise, we'll just talk right past each other. And semantics is how we define words. It's so important. We'll get into a little bit more, but if I'm using a word one way and they're interpreting a different way, again, we're going to talk right past each other. Okay. So how do we achieve this? How do we achieve this first step to understand their views? Well, you ask a question. And we'll get to what that question is here in a minute. But you ask a question, you gather as much information from that person as you can before you move on, right? You want to basically go, okay, you get to a point where you go, I'm pretty sure I understand what you're saying. Is it this? Okay, good. I understand it then. You want to get to that place, okay? You want to listen intently and carefully. Obviously, this shows respect also. Remember, this is not just about these tactics. It's about loving them and showing interest in them because we're trying to win them for Jesus. Oh yeah, there's an example here too I want to share with you. So with that, this guy he had a conversation with, he said, I once had a young chat with a young professional named John who was sitting next to me on a flight. When he learned of my purpose on the trip, he informed me that he was not a Christian and neither were any of his friends. John then said, I used to be a Christian, but I'm not anymore. And Greg says, let me ask you this. Do you think that particular detail was important before I moved on? That he was a Christian, but now he's not? Very important to know that. But he didn't stop there. The man said, actually, I used to be a preacher's kid. And then Greg said, oh, I'm sorry. Did your dad die? No, my dad didn't die. He's just not a preacher anymore. In fact, he's not a Christian either. Yikes. Don't you think that was important to know? It kind of goes back to that video I shared. Get to know not just their view, but like a little bit about them too. You can't have too much information. So that was one example that he gave in the book. Like, it's so important to know these things. What's that question? Now, there's a variation of this. You can use any variation of this, but the question he puts in there is, the question is you ask is, what do you mean by that? So the person that says, we can't trust the Bible because it was just written by men, you want to know first, oh, what do you mean by that when you say that? Or any variation of this. Basically, anything to ask the question, help me understand, right? Help me understand what you're trying to say. He's got some examples here too of some other options you could use. See, it is, so if somebody says to me, let's say, they say, Jesse, do you believe in evolution? I might say, what do you mean by evolution? Because there's, more than one kind. Or, Jesse, but what about all the evil in the world? And I might say, what do you mean by evil? What makes bad things bad? What do you mean by evil? Or they might say, Jesse, do you take the Bible literally? I might say something like, depends what you mean by literally. What were you thinking of? Another one might be, Jesse, science has proved there's no God. And I might say, really? How? And then the last one he has here that, Jesse, abortion is okay because a fetus is a human, but not a person. And I might say, really? What's the difference? What do you mean by that? Can you explain to me what you mean? Okay. This step is really easy. You just spend the time. There's no pressure on you. There's no pressure on you to do or say anything scientific like we've been talking about or philosophical. You don't have to do anything but get to know what their view is, and that's the goal. So by doing this, you engage the person in a good way. You show a genuine interest, right? Because that's what you want to do. That you want to genuinely be interested in what they have to say. You urge them to think more carefully about their views. That's another thing it does. It makes them think more carefully about their views. And you get a free education, like that Buddhist thing. I might not know anything about Buddhism, but if I talk to somebody who's a Buddhist for an hour, I might learn some stuff. Okay. Here's some quick tips too. As the dialogue continues, so let's say you're in a situation. Let me just rewind it again for you. Somebody makes a claim. You're at a coffee shop, whatever the situation is. Jesse, science has proven there is no God. And I say, what do you mean by that? Can you explain to me, like I'm 5, like what are you trying to say exactly so I'm on the same page, right? So you're in that situation. Here's a few tips. As that dialogue continues, gently try to guide it into a more spiritually productive direction, if you can. You won't always be able to. And you might need additional questions with that. You need clarity. If you are unclear, keep asking questions. Like, we'll get into an example where the statement is really kind of ambiguous and unclear. So you want to be clear on what they mean. You do not want to misrepresent their view. Okay. There's this thing. It's called, we're not going to get too much into it today, a straw man fallacy. Anybody knows what this is? Yeah, but do you know what the fallacy is? Can you explain it? Yes. So the straw man fallacy is this. I make a claim, then the other person restates the claim in a way that I didn't intend it to be, and then they try to defeat that thing that they said. So they're basically they're not answering my argument. They're kind of twisting it and then coming at that. If that makes sense. The straw man fallacy. So in the same way, you don't want to do that to them. You don't want to accidentally misunderstand their view. You don't want to knock down an argument that they're not trying to make. And another thing is, like we talked about earlier, semantics. Semantics is really important. You need to define your terms. If they start using words that you think they're not defining the same as you, like, or you say God, what do you mean by God? You might find out they mean like Santa Claus in the sky. That's not what I'm talking about. What do you mean by religion? Can you define what you mean? Moral, good, love? Maybe love to them means just approving of what everybody does. Well, that's not what I'm talking about when I say love. You need to define your terms if you're unclear. And here's the thing, because people don't often think too deep about their own beliefs, you need to clarify it not just for your sake, but for their sake also. They might not have thought that deeply about it. Oftentimes they haven't. And this is part of trying to draw that out. People often have very, very strong views, but have not honestly considered other points of view. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians do that too. Don't be one of those people that don't assess things objectively. And then here's the thing. When you start asking this question, what do you mean by that? And you're trying to get clarification, do not be surprised when you ask, what do you mean by that? If they look at you like this. What? What do I mean by that? Oh boy. Hold on, let me think, right? That can happen a lot. Like a deer in the headlights, right? Yep. So there's a difference between, so let me give you two scenarios. The one we just talked about, where let's say you're sitting across from somebody and they make a claim, and then you're trying to figure out what they mean by that, rather than sitting across from someone who's not even talking about anything, and you just start asking them questions. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but that, I mean, well, let me ask you this. Were they making a claim?
Yes.
What was the claim?
The claim is that all are good.
And what was your question? Let's just say you said, what do you mean by that, right? Pretend.
Yeah. I basically said, oh, is that
Okay.
like everybody?
Okay. So if you're doing it properly, and this can happen, if you're doing it properly, they still could get upset. That's when you got to know when to stop. Again, you keep pushing, they're not going to want to talk to you anymore about it. I've been in that situation fairly recently where you start to sense something and you go, it's okay. We don't have to keep talking about this, right? Because you want to leave the door as much as you want them to believe. You got to have wisdom and know that if I keep pushing, that door might close on me, right? All right, so back to those challenges that I mentioned earlier. Again, questions at any time. I want to know how you guys might respond. Oh, yeah. Oh, all right, I got to go. Just kidding.
Here.
Okay.
Bye. Another beer.
Oh, boy. Tell me who it was right now. First of all, I'm so glad that you admitted you didn't know the answer, because that's honest. I'm sure she appreciated that. I'll just touch on it real quick. We think of evil as a thing when really evil is a deprivation in something. So darkness isn't really a thing. Light is a thing, but when you take away light, it's dark. We describe it as this word we call dark. Really what it is just an absence of light. In the same way, evil is not a thing. It's an absence of good, or it's going against what's good. So God is what ought to be, right? His nature is what we mean by good. That is what ought to be. But if you go against what ought to be of what ought not to be, you have what we call evil. But it's not really a thing in the same way as good is. It's a deprivation of good. It's like this. It's like the sunshine is a thing, and the tree, if it's in the way, casts a shadow. The shadow is just an absence of the light that the tree is blocking. So Evil isn't like, okay, God said, okay, here's good and here's evil. No, here's good. But when you don't line up with good, that means it's not the way it ought to be. It's not something you can create, but it's something that you rightly said, free beings, if they violate that good, that we use this term. If the term is evil. Does that kind of make sense? But I'm just saying, I don't want to get into too much depth on that topic right now, but you can go deeper into it. But that would be the short answer I give you, is that it's not a thing like good is, it's just a deprivation of good. Okay. Well, I don't know about, there was a tree of knowledge of good and evil, but the main point is that God's nature is good. Any deviation from that nature is what we call evil. We think of it as a thing, but really it's just a deprivation of good.
That leader warned you after this. Huh?
No. I want to know who it was. I want to know who it is now. Okay. Anyways, let's move on. So, challenges. Let me go through. Yeah, we got plenty of time here. So, challenge 1. This is going back to those scenarios. I'm not going to go through the whole scenario, but here's the claim that the guy made in this first scenario. It's not rational to believe in God. There is no proof. Using the first step of Columbo, what might you ask? Okay, good. What do you mean by proof? You're trying to gather information. You're trying to understand that term they're using, proof. Excellent. What did you say?
Yeah, why do you say that?
So that would be more like trying to get to know why they believe. We're trying to know what they believe right now. Does that make sense? So what you said is good because you're trying to, because proof, that word proof could be a loaded term, right? What do you mean by proof? Do you mean like absolutely a mathematical proof, or do you just mean like evidence, right? Something like that, evidence. So very good. And again, the default question is, what do you mean by that? In other words, can you explain that to me more deeply? Or can you give me more details or more depth on what you mean by that, right? So that'd be a way to do it. What do you mean by rational? Absolutely. And what do you mean by God? Because sometimes, like I said, they might believe in an old man with a beard in the sky. Just get to a point where you're confident that you can repeat back to them, and you're confident you get what they're saying. Okay.
You think
Yeah. Right. You want to get on the same.
you're rational?
Yeah. So some of the answers that he put in the book, or some of the questions, I should say, when they say that, first one was, I think it's in your notes there. What do you mean by God? So that's one of the ones we talked about. That is, what kind of God do you reject? Another one, what specifically is irrational about believing in God? And then this one, since you're concerned about proof for God's existence, what kind of evidence would you find acceptable? What arguments for God have you considered, and what did you find wrong with them? You're trying to get to the bottom of their claim here, okay? You're trying to know why, or not why they believe, but you're trying to know what they're really saying here is what you're trying to do. So that way you're confident going forward. Challenge 2. This was the second scenario where the person said, well, Christianity is basically the same as all other religions. The main similarity is love. We shouldn't tell others how to live or believe. Using, again, the first Columbo tactic, what might you say? How are all religions basically the same? Exactly. That's a good one. You're by saying that, you're trying to get clarity. Very good. So that would actually be Columbo 3. You're making a point using a question, which is fine. That's fine. You could go to that. If you feel confident you know what they're talking about, you could skip ahead. The first step isn't necessary unless you don't feel confident that you understand their claim. Does that make sense? But that's fine. But yeah, I think that's a good way to go about to that third step. But the first step, if you are confused at all, get clarity. So a couple of the things that he put down was, how much time have you studied other religions in order to compare the details? Or why would the similarities be more important than the differences? I'm curious, what do you think Jesus's attitude was on this issue? Because they're kind of making, they're not saying they're against Christianity. They're just saying like they're all the same. It's all about love, right? Another question you might ask is, do you think Jesus thought all religions were basically equal? Right? Again, they're not bashing Christianity here, so he's kind of using, what do you think Jesus would say about that? And then last one he has here, is that isn't telling people to love one another just another example of doing what you're objecting to? In other words, you're telling others how they should live, right? They're saying we shouldn't tell others how to live, but then they're saying, but love is how we should live, so in so many words. So you're trying to get clarity there. We'll do the one more challenge, and that'll be this one here. You can't take the Bible too seriously because it was only written by men and men make some mistakes. Now, again, assuming we don't fully know what they're getting at, what question might you ask to get clarity? And again, it's okay to say, what do you mean by that? That's the default question. You could just do that. But if you want any if you want to get clarity on any terms they're using or get to know, like, okay, explain this to me like I'm 5. What are you trying to say? Yeah, yeah, very good. You say there's mistakes. Can you tell me, like, because I want to get clarity. Like, you say there's mistakes. Like, are there 3 mistakes? Are there 100? And what are those? Can you help me understand that? Very good.
Well, how much percentage can you take the Bible seriously?
Say that again. Sorry.
How much percentage?
Oh,
Take seriously?
you can't take the Bible too seriously, right? Because they're saying, you can kind of take it seriously, but you're saying, well, how seriously can you take it? I like it. So you're saying, how do you know it was only man made and not also God inspired? That would be that might be more step 2, where step 2 is like, what are your reasons for believing that? But that's fine, because this right here, it's not too ambiguous. It kind of makes sense. Like, I don't think I have to dig too deep. I kind of know what they're saying. So you might just want to go, okay, so what are the reasons you think that's true? And have you ever considered, like, maybe it's written by men and God? So I like it. Yes, it is, because you want to get clarity on the level of expertise they have to talk about this. Very good. Like, you say you say you know the Bible well enough to make this claim. How well do you actually know the Bible? And don't get caught off guard by, it's like, I'm asking you this on the spot. In a conversation, you can take time with other questions to figure out what you want to ask. You know what I mean? But really, it's going to be intuitive. Like, if you can say to yourself, I don't understand what they're saying, or you have any doubt, just keep asking until you are confident that you do, because you have to understand what they're trying to say. So this is just a practice. So some of the answers, yeah, yeah, I like it, because that's wisdom right there, because you're saying, I don't want to have to try to figure this out on my own. People have already figured out how to do this better than me. What do they do? Exactly. Very good. Um, some of the things he wrote in to this objection would be this, and this goes to, I can't remember, one of you said it over here. Yeah, I think it was Cindy. He says, first question he'd ask is, do you have any books in your, oh no, this is different, but he says, do you have any books in your library? If so, do you find any truth in those books, also written by humans who are prone to error? In other words, you're saying, let me get clarity here, because you're saying that because it's written by men, it's got mistakes. Well, wait, don't you have any books that are written by men that don't have mistakes, like the dictionary? Like, you're trying to get clarity, and then by getting clarity, that actually can help the person go, oh, wait, yeah, I didn't really think about that. Another question he asks here is there a reason you think the Bible is less truthful or reliable than the books you own? Okay, he's getting clarity. Do people always make mistakes in what they write? And if not, then why would you dismiss the Bible simply because it was written by some men? Now, he's not getting into inspiration right now of God, but he's just sticking with what they're saying. But he's just saying, just because of what it's written by man doesn't mean there's mistakes. And then lastly, he says, do you think that if God did exist, that he would be able to use humans to write down exactly what he wanted? Like, I love this tactic. I use it a lot. If God exists, don't you think this is possible? Well, yeah. Okay, so if you're coming from a presupposition that he doesn't exist, then I could see. But if he exists, then of course it's possible he could have men write down what he wanted, right? Okay. So that's all about getting clarity. Uh, Asking questions enables you to escape the charge of this if they say, oh, you're twisting my words. You don't want to twist their words. So do whatever you can to escape that accusation. Ask questions. A question is a request for clarification, specifically so you don't twist their words. Okay. When I ask for clarification question, or sorry, when I ask a clarification question, my goal is to understand a person's view, not to distort it. Okay. And that's the Christ-like thing to do, right? I see this all the time, and I'm not going to get political here, but on either side, I see it all the time where there's almost like an agenda. Whatever they can do or say, even if they have to distort what the other person's saying, they'll do it simply to get to a place where the person looks stupid. That's not Christ-like. Let's not do that. Let's make sure we don't distort someone's view or their claim that they're making, okay? Because we wouldn't want them to do to us. All right, let's go cover step 2. Step 2 is reversing the burden of proof. So the first step, they made a claim. We're having a conversation. We go, oh, what did you mean by that? Can you define that word? Explain it to me like I'm 5. And then you finally get to a point where you go, okay, let me repeat it in my own words and tell me if that's what you mean. And then you do, and they go, yeah, that's what I mean. Great. You got clarification. You've done your job. Now you reverse that burden of proof. Christians are not the only ones who need to give reasons for their point of view. But it's not unusual for people to forget that they have the same responsibility. People often think that expressing their opinion or their point of view is enough. And some might think it's a gotcha moment, but it's not. Okay? I'll tell them, I'll call them later. So an example might be, they might say, science has proven God doesn't exist. Gotcha. What? You didn't get me. You just made a claim. Big deal. They said science has proven God doesn't exist. And here's the sad part. And this happened to me. I know. I'm sure it's happened to some of you. But just a stupid statement like that, it will get many people intimidated. Just a claim like that. It'll get many people intimidated at this simple claim. You know why it gets them intimidated? Because they think it's their job to prove it wrong. So if someone says, science has proven God doesn't exist, and you get nervous, maybe it's because you think you have to try to explain why they're wrong. That's not right. You don't have to show why they're wrong. They made the claim. They have to show why it's true. So you don't have to show why their claim is wrong. They have to prove it right. So do not be intimidated by any claim like this. You simply say something like, wow, really? I didn't know that. How so? In other words, how has science disproven that? You're asking for the reasons they have for the claim. He gives this analogy of like a house, right? The roof is like the conclusion or the statement or the claim. But if you have no walls or no supporting reasons, it collapses, right? Anybody can say anything. All right, let's talk about an opinion versus an argument. So an opinion or a claim, you can use those words interchangeably. An opinion or claim is just a point of view. We all have them. We all have points of view. But an argument, as defined of how we defined it earlier, is a point of view that's supported by reasons. And we need to learn to spot the difference. Here's an example of some opinions or claims. Well, the universe just evolved over time, so it just appears designed, going back to the teleological argument. Or, we don't need God to explain the universe. This is just a claim. That's just a point of view. Okay. Or the Bible is just a fairy tale. And then we think, oh gosh, I got to try to explain to them why that's not true. No, you don't. And don't do it. Don't try. Or, Jesus' body was actually stolen from the tomb. Then the disciples lied about the resurrection. What made you think that? You don't have to show why that's false. Those are just opinions and points of view. Okay. But here's an example of an argument, though, that I just came up with. We talked a little bit about the human DNA last week. Yeah. The human DNA has been intelligently designed. Now, if I just stopped there at that line, that would just be a claim. It would just be an opinion. But I don't stop there. I give reasons. I go, one reason is because we know from our experience that information always comes from a mind. We've never seen information come from anything else. And the DNA contains a vast amount of information. Therefore, it seems very reasonable it must have come from and been put together by an intelligent mind. Okay? There's a difference. I gave supporting reasons for my claim. Does that make sense? Okay. Here's an example from the book. He was asked to be on a radio show. Greg Koukl was. Just kind of go through this quickly, but it was interesting. So he's on this radio show, and this guy says, we don't need God because we have the Big Bang Theory. We have the Big Bang Theory that explains to us how the universe got here, so we don't need God. And then he used kind of the same answer that we've been over a little bit, was that, the Big Bang needs a Big Banger. There needs to have been a cause, right? And the Big Bang can't cause itself, so, it actually points to God, he says. Anyways, they went on. And the caller, so Greg is on the radio show, and there was a caller calling in. The caller said this, and the caller disagreed. And the caller said something like this. Well, actually, the Big Bang doesn't need God. And here's what he said. Tell me if this makes sense. You could start with nothing, and you could say that there was nothing but an infinite, continuous moment until one tiny little insignificant thing happened, a point that happened in the nothingness. And I'm sure Greg is like, oh my goodness, right? He's going on, and it's confusing. And just on the surface, it seems like that makes no sense, right? So he went on for a little bit. Now, Greg could have tried to refute his claim, right? He could have okay, you're saying that there was nothing and that something tiny happened, which caused a chain reaction and then created a universe. Okay, that's your view. Okay, I understand your view. He could have, from that point, tried to refute that and try to explain why that's false. But instead, why do all that work? Why do all the work of trying to disprove a silly claim like that when all you have to do is go, why on earth do you believe that? Can I have the reasons? So why go through all the work of trying to refute that? He didn't. Instead, he just reversed the burden of proof by asking, what are your reasons for believing that? That's Columbo step 2. Columbo step 1, again, is to know and understand what they believe more clearly. Columbo step 2 is to get to why they believe it. Okay? 1 is get to know what they believe, and then 2 is why they believe it. The caller then said something like this. I'll read it for you. Now, I don't know, he doesn't say what happened after this, but this caller said something like this. Well, we don't need God to explain the universe. You could say that there was a variation in the nothingness before the Big Bang that set off a chain of events and unfolded into gradually more and more complex reactions. Eventually, you'll get planets and galaxies. Now, that's a claim. And you might say, whoa. Please, can you slow down a little bit? Can you explain to me what you mean? Like I'm 5, because you said a lot there and I just don't get it. Right? That's the first step. That's step 1. And you might say, I really want to understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, I truly don't.
Exactly. And if you don't, or if you don't think you might, get that clarity. Get to a point where you can say, okay, I think I get you. Is this what you mean? And then after you think you understand what they're saying, you might say something like, okay, I think I understand what your claim is. But what makes you think that that's the way it happened? That's Columbo step 2. First, you get clarity, and then you ask, what are your reasons for believing that? That's step 2. Now, right here, the second line where he says, well, you could say that there was this variation. You're right. You could say that. You could say anything, though. But that's not giving me reasons. I could come up with all kinds of stuff you could say. Now, many times, now obviously, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, were like, that makes no sense, right? So I agree with you. But many times, this kind of statement, when it maybe sometimes it sounds philosophical or it sounds sciency, if that's not a word, but you know, it might, that statement can psychologically unsettle some people because it's either really, really confusing and overwhelming, right? Which you would use step one to get clarity, or because you're afraid that maybe they have a good point. I just don't know what it is, right? But if you don't know, you don't even know if they have a good point until you ask for the reasons why they have. So don't get unsettled, just get clarity. A person needs reasons for their assertion, not merely tell a tale or a fancy bedtime story. I mean, like again, we can say anything we want. Don't let fancy language unsettle you. Sometimes words, people will use words you don't even know what they mean. Figure it out. Ask them. Don't let them off the hook when it comes to giving reasons or evidence for their claim. Now, thinking about your example, Cindy, where if you're in this situation and you're to a point where like, okay, I need to know your reasons. I know what you're saying. I get your claim, but I'm not hearing any reasons for this claim. And then let's say you keep probing and they get upset. That very well could happen. Again, try to have the discernment wisdom to know when to stop. But assuming they keep going, don't let them get a free ride. Make them explain it. Now, here's some, this is the Columbo, these are some Columbo, these are some questions for Columbo step 2 you could use. So again, these are questions that are trying to get at the reasons why they believe. One is, okay, so how did you come to that conclusion? Right? You understand their claim. Now you ask, how did you come to that conclusion? That's actually the main one he uses in the book. Or you could say, why do you say that? Or what are your reasons for holding that view? Or what makes you think it happened that way? Or I'm curious, why does that idea seem compelling to you? Now, a lot of times they will get caught off guard, and some people will admit they don't have any reasons for their view. Then what? Then you might say something like, okay, so why would you believe in something that you have no reasons to believe? You know why they do? Because they want to believe something and they go, well, some pretty smart people believe this, therefore I must be justified in believing it. But they haven't thought about it a lot, okay? Who has the burden of proof? The burden of proof goes to the one that makes the claim. I would reject any impulse to counter their claim. Reject that impulse because we will have it. I still have it. I still want to be like, no, that's wrong, and here's why. Reject that impulse. It's not your job to defeat their claim. You know what I'm talking about?
Everybody guilty.
Oh yeah.
Be the one that win.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like jujitsu in a way. If you know what jujitsu is, like you're letting them do all the work, right? It's not your job to defeat their claim, it's their job to defend it. And keep in mind, Christians, this is true for you too. So be very careful when you make claims. When you make claims, if you're going to be fair, you should be ready to give reasons, okay? They must be able to explain why their view or their claim is more probable than yours. We are justified in believing an explanation that has better reasons to support it. Now, you always ask yourself this: did they just give me an argument, or was that just an opinion? Okay. I'm going to try to run through this quickly because we're going to run out of time otherwise. Reliable rescues. What do you do when you don't know what to do? There's 3 tactics he gives in the book. One is called the professor's ploy. So I'll explain it real quick. Let's say he uses an example of like in a college classroom, professor stands up, he's mocking Christianity and he makes a claim. And let's just use the old fashioned, we don't need to believe in God. Science has disproved God's existence. And then you as a student, let's just say you go, can you give me some reasons or some support for that claim? Now, In the book, he goes, sometimes the person in this scenario is the professor, sometimes they'll catch on to what you're trying to do. And so they made the claim, but they might say something like, oh, okay, you're one of them Christians, huh? Well, okay, why don't you tell me how everything got here and how the universe existed? Don't fall for it. They're trying to shift the burden back on you, but you didn't make any claims. You don't need to take it. Don't take the bait. If you have not made a claim, you have nothing to defend. You might say, actually, I haven't even made a claim, so you don't even know what I believe. So I have nothing to defend, Professor. I'm sorry. You have no obligation to try to prove them wrong. So if they try to flip it back on you, as long as you haven't made a claim, you're under no obligation. Getting out of the hot seat. We've talked about this a little bit. When you're overwhelmed or you feel outmatched, you shift. You shift from trying to persuade them and you shift to a fact-finding mode. This is totally legitimate. You're being humble. You don't know the answer. You've admitted it. You go, wow, you know a lot more about this subject than I do. Can you teach me a few things? I have some questions. You use Columbo then to become a student instead. And then when the pressure's off, you do your homework, like we talked about before. And then the last rescue, I can slow down a little bit here. The last rescue is called narrating the debate. So what is this? This has happened to me a lot, and I'm sure it's happened to you a lot. This is when they avoid the questions and they try to change the subject. Years ago, I would have, and I would never do it now because I know it doesn't work. I would have debates with my uncle online about God. He's an atheist, or at least he was. I don't know where he's at now, but we'd have debates about the stuff. And anytime I thought I made a good point, he would shift. Like we would go from talking about God to all of a sudden talking about dinosaurs or evolution. I'm like, wait a minute. Why are you changing? We haven't even figured this out yet. So it's when they try to change the subject and avoid your questions or avoid the topic. Real quick, I'm going to read this real quick. So 93, narrating the debate. Greg's comment on this. So he was, where was he talking at? In a conversation, you might say something like this. If you notice they're trying to shift the subject, you might say something like, can I just say something? I'm sorry. I just want you to notice something. Our talk, it just took kind of a turn here. First you made a fairly controversial statement. I asked you a couple questions, but you haven't answered them. Instead, you've taken off in another direction. But can you do me a favor? Before we move on to a new topic, would it be okay with you if we finish the old one? Because I'm really interested in your response. Sometimes you'll be dealing with something that's called somebody that's called a dishonest skeptic. What do I mean by that? It's okay to be skeptical. Like there are things you probably should be skeptical about. Hey, this car gets 1,000 miles to the gallon, so buy it. No, I don't buy it. I don't believe that. I mean, if it's gas car, right? But you know what I mean? Like some things you should just be skeptical about. That's okay. But don't be a dishonest skeptic. In other words, if that guy all of a sudden gives you some really good reasons why, like it's this new technology and it really does get that much miles per gallon, then be an honest skeptic and go, oh, okay, actually that makes sense. So, but when you deal with a dishonest skeptic, in other words, no matter what you say, no matter how logical it is, they might not be interested in an honest dialogue. So identify that. Or they might try to use a couple tactics themselves. I'll give you two. They might try to use what's called an ad hominem. Now, ad hominem is a fallacy. It means at the man. Ad hominem, at the man, meaning they'll throw insults. So they might not know how to respond, and they might say something like, well, you're just a bigot, so of course you think that. What did they do? They just attacked your character and think all of a sudden they have a step up in the argument. Or you might hear, well, all Christians are stupid, so whatever. Of course you believe that. So they're basically attacking the person, not the argument. That's a fallacy. Maybe I am a jerk. Maybe I am stupid. Does that mean the argument's wrong or false? That doesn't mean that. And you want to point it out lovingly. So the way he does it in the book, he says, sometimes they'll use an ad hominem and they'll attack your character. And he might say something like this. Did you notice what just happened? I raised a question about your idea that all religions lead to God. And instead of responding to my question, you called me a bigot. You changed the subject. We were talking about an issue, and then all of a sudden you attacked my character. Why did you do that? Okay. Or, like we talked about earlier, they might make a straw man argument, or they might misrepresent your view. And then once they take your view, twist it, then they'll attack that new view, which is not even your view, if that makes sense. I'll give you an example. So last couple of weeks, we talked about the design argument or teleological argument. What if I do this? What if I make an argument from design like we did in the last couple of weeks? Let's say I went through the whole argument with them. I gave them all the info just for pretend. And let's say they say something like, well, you just think the universe is designed because you're a Christian, so you're biased. I might say, was that the argument I made? I didn't make that based off of my Christianity. I made it based off of science. So he's saying that, well, I'm just going to ignore what you said. And I'm going to say, well, you just believe that because you're a Christian. Did you not hear the argument I made? That would be a straw man. So those are some tactics in the book, again, to kind of avoid these things. It's in your notes. Obviously, if you want to go deeper, get the book. It's not very expensive. It's a good read. And then any more questions before I kind of sum up a couple of things?
Sir.
You might have, yeah. You have to discern that. Sometimes you can recover. If they're humble enough, they might go, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, it's not a good argument. But you have to take it as it comes.
Oh,
Yes.
later on.
And I don't know what your personal experience was, but I would say it's probably better that they were kind so that you were more likely to take the word seriously.
They react
Mhm.
to my anger or frustration.
Right.
Change me.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Very good. Lastly, what if somebody uses the Columbo tactic on me? Uh-oh. Here's the thing. If we've thought about our views, we shouldn't worry about that. But even if, obviously, we're never going to have all the answers. The other reason why we shouldn't worry about it is because as long as you don't pretend to know what you don't know, and you're humble like you were in that conversation, I never even thought about that. That's a good question. Then you don't have to fear it. The only people that have to fear it are the ones that are being dishonest. Do you think I mind if someone asks me, what do I mean by that? I don't mind. I'll tell you to the best of my ability. I want you to know what I'm trying to say, and they do too. Okay? Or do you think I mind if someone goes to Columbo 2 and says, well, how did you come to that conclusion? I don't mind that. Because I've already decided that I'm not going to make a claim unless I can give some reason. Maybe it's not the best reason. Maybe they won't find it convincing, but I'm not just going to make a claim and walk away. Okay? So try to have some kind of reason for your claims. If you're worried about these things, then maybe you got to do some more homework. That's okay. But again, even if you don't know the subject well enough, as long as you're honest about what you do know, you don't have to fear it. And this is where apologetics can come in, and a good understanding of Scripture. That's why I said it's not just about the tactics, but the knowledge, wisdom, and character thing. be a kind person. Have good character as best you can. You're not going to be perfect. Try to use your words and your time wisely, and try to build up enough knowledge where you feel semi-confident in having a discussion. But you're not going to be able to answer everything. But if you can do all these things and practice some of these stuff, again, we'll go over it again in Tactics 2. We'll kind of re-enter it in your mind. I would get the book if you really want to know. But if you can clarify what they're saying and then ask them for reasons why they believe it, that's a good start. Any questions or any comments? Because I'm done with this. Okay. Awesome. If you want to look at the book, it'll be up here, or I can send you a link on Amazon. I don't remember what it was, 15, 20 bucks, something like that. Yeah. All right. If you guys don't have any questions, I will close this out in prayer. Right. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much right now for the book we're going over. I pray that it's useful. I pray that it's helpful. I pray that it sparks some kind of desire in us to want to get better and wiser in sharing our faith. A lot of us struggle with this, Lord, and I know I have many times myself. So please help us to be more prepared in the future. And I just pray that you bless our night, bless our week, and just keep us safe and with our family, Lord. And we thank you for this night, and we give you the rest of this evening in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, guys.